All right. Ladies, welcome to 3 tools to master a podcast interview on both sides of the microphone so we can help you nail it. How many of you have wanted to or have been on a podcast, either as an interviewer or as an interviewee? Raise your hand. Let me see. Okay, raise your hand if you'd like to do it in the future, if you'd like to be on a podcast in the future. Great. How many of you would like to actually host a podcast in the future? Anybody want to take it that next level? Thinking about it, maybe, possibly. Awesome. These tools will help you do both of those things. And the beauty of this is that these tools will also help you in your everyday speaking, or if you want to kind of expand it and do Instagram or Facebook Lives, you can apply these tools to that very thing. Now, why is podcasting such a huge benefit and blessing? I'll tell you right now, you can look up any study. It really, really is. That's why there's millions of them out there. It will help you in what I call the 3 C's. It will give you credibility, it will give you content, and it is cost effective. So those 3 C's alone are so valuable. It also can increase your web traffic, your lead generation, and it can also increase your conversion rate with the things that you do have out there. It can increase that conversion rate. The other thing that I personally love as a mom, and I love that it is one-time energy. I can take a podcast and I can leverage it. I can take pieces from it and I can put it on social media and boom, I've already got social media content. And it also helps me with networking. So when I'm bringing guests on, I'm not just being credible, but I'm networking with that person. When we see each other the next time or afterwards we're talking, I can't tell you how many times we've been chatting afterwards and then we go, oh, that would be a great thing. Oh yeah, I'd love to speak at your thing. Or I'd love to have you do this part with teaching my women in the Disciples Thought Leadership Circle, blah, 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 whatever. There's this beautiful win-win, and it also provides opportunities. When I'm going somewhere, I'm always on the lookout for those people that I can invite on to a podcast, and it's a great conversation starter and it's a great win-win. So those are all really good reasons to consider either doing a podcast or being on a podcast. And interviewing is just so much easier than starting your own, but still, it's a great way to do it. And like I said, you can start small by doing Instagram Lives or Facebook Lives, and you can still use these same concepts. All right, so let's jump in. I have 3 tools, but I'm going to apply them first as an interviewer, and then we're going to apply them as an interviewee. Same kind of thing, but you apply them just slightly differently. All right, and you're welcome to put any questions in the chat. I'm going to stop after each of these tools and give you a chance to write down or ask a question. All right, first thing is to be prepared. Be prepared. First thing I will say, hands down, is pray. Absolutely pray. Pray to know what to ask. Pray to know what to share. Pray that it will go smoothly. Pray that tech works. Pray, pray, pray. And like I said, pray to look for those opportunities. When I say pray for looking opportunities, I mean in everyday life or the things that you've been asked to do, or in events that you're going to, or anything that's kind of connected to what you're doing, you're writing, you're speaking about, whatever your message might be. So I got invited as an influencer, which kind of made me chuckle because I'm not like, 250,000 followers kind of an influencer, but I was invited to the backstage of the Book of Mormon set. And it was so sweet. We got to see the whole set and meet the different actors, and we had lunch and all the things. Well, I happened to get seated next to Jackson Vanderwerken. I don't know if you know who he is, but he plays Nephi. And we ended up talking and got along like a house on fire. And I was listening to his story, and it was incredible. He was literally the last one looked at and chosen out of like 700 people. He was back east. He said they were looking for someone this age. I wasn't that age. They were looking for someone that had experience. I didn't have any experience. They were looking, I mean, he was not their guy. And yet the story, you'll have to go and listen to it. No, I'm not just trying to do that, but at LDSPMA, it's called To Create, right? So there you go. But if you go listen to his interview, it's an amazing story. So faith promoting, so amazing. So I'm listening to that. And what do you think I'm thinking? I'm like, that's a podcast interview. And I said, hey, how would you like to be on our podcast, Call to Create? And he said, I would love to. So fantastic. So looking for those opportunities, be your bold self. This is a great way for you to have a platform for them to be able to share their message. And then it's a win-win because you're both going to be blessing each other. I was at a conference that I was speaking at, and then at the time that I was attending a session. I wasn't speaking at it, but Laurel Day was speaking at it. And she is the CEO of Deseret Book, if you don't know. And there was a line, of course, what afterwards. And I'm thinking she was amazing. She was articulate. She had so many good things to share. And I'm thinking, I think she'd be a great candidate for a guest. So I'm walking down, but she's, CEO of Deseret Book. So I get to her and we're talking. And then I just said, I love what you shared. It was incredible. I would love to podcast interview you on Call to Create for LDS PMA. And she went, LDS PMA, you got it. I'm on. What? So fantastic. Now I have a podcast all my own, but is she going to come on my podcast? Probably not. But because I've got some credibility from doing this podcast, I could then up level who I was looking for and networking with. So that's something to consider is as an interviewer, being able to keep up leveling your podcasting opportunities so that you can up level who you invite. The next thing is on be prepared, know your guest. Know your guest. Make sure that you have done your homework, that you have found out about them. Usually your producer will give you a sheet that will give you an info sheet on them, a bio and all the things, links to the things that they've done. If you don't have a producer, do the legwork yourself. And then think about how to make a connection with that guest. Dig deep in your memory and think, what kind of connection do I have with this person? What, anything that we've shared, any experience that we've experienced together, what could that look like? And find what that connection is. I remember when I was interviewing Jane Clayson Johnson, I remembered from the deep recesses of my mind when she was doing the CBS morning show with what's his toes, African-American man. I can't remember his name. Anyway, she was doing the show with him. And I just remember seeing 1 or 2 episodes. That was it. But I remember she had this big white styrofoam, like sipping kind of cup. And it was on the anchor desk. And I remember looking at it and going, is she making a statement that she doesn't drink coffee? Because that's a pretty big statement with this big styrofoam cup, right? So I get on the interview and I was really curious about that. So we get along and I start talking about it. And I said, did you have a white styrofoam cup back in the day? She roared. She was laughing so hard. She's like, I can't believe you remember that. I did. And then she went on to tell the story about it. It was so fantastic. So find that connection to that guest because you'll find one. And if you do that, it's just a better interview. Also, in knowing your guest, find out the lingo, the verbiage. She was an anchor woman, so I'm using that lingo. I interviewed Steve Young. What do you think I was doing? I'm finding out about football verbiage, right? Who do you think I went to? My 11-year-old son. That's right, who loves and eats and sleeps and drinks football. So I can make sure I'm talking about things in the right way. When I remember interviewing Scott Savage, who is best-selling author, I remember we connected at Storymakers conferences when I was speaking there. And so I connected about that, and I knew his wife and him, Jennifer, and we had met at the grocery store before again, and just all these different things and saying, yeah, I remember Jennifer was doing, planning out all your assemblies and all the things. And he's like, oh my gosh, yes. So find whatever connection you have, and especially if you met them or had that opportunity, write that on your phone and make a note of that. So when it comes time to do the interview, you can allude to that and say, yeah, I remember when we were da da da. What does that do? Increases your credibility and increases their trust in you, that you know what you're doing and that you know these people and you kind of play in those circles. That's a really important thing. The last thing to know on this piece right here is know your red thread. So know what it is as an interviewer you want to accomplish from that podcast. Do you want to focus on their journey, on their success? Do you want to focus on the trials? What I do is I talk about their wilderness and their mountains. What was the low and the high that they've had along their journey? Or is it how they've used the gospel in it? What is the thread, the red thread? And that comes from that Greek mythology of the Minotaur in the labyrinth, and he needs that red thread to be able to get out. What is that red thread that's going to run through that interview so that it makes sense to people that you've kind of had this theme that kind of goes on? Now, sometimes I've had an idea of a theme and then we've had a totally different tack. Go with it. And I'll mention it. I'll say, wow, it seems like we kind of have a theme here today of this, how to get back up again, how to get back up again. And people will pick up on that and they'll appreciate that. So something to consider on that. Last couple of things on being prepared, and that's more of the sort of logistics, how to. When you get ready to do the interview, do a tech check. Make sure your mic is working. You haven't bumped any knobs. Make sure that your Zoom is on. It's been going on. You don't want to just start it when you're ready to start the thing. You want it having been on there for 10, 15 minutes so you know all is well. And then make sure that your lighting and your sound is good. I don't know about you, but I have the weirdest setup. I have about 4 books, Insights from President Nelson and Teachings of Russell M. Nelson, that's holding up my laptop for the right height. I've got my Yeti microphone, but I've also got things up. I have a half moon window and it lets in light and gives me a dappled effect. So I have these poster boards up there. It's super professional looking, but I've got all these things up to make sure that I have the right lighting at any time of day. Watch for that, because if you don't watch for that, you'll start having this dappled sunlight effect. Anybody had that before? I was interviewing Dr. Stacy Taniguchi. He's the one that's climbed all the mountains, Everest, K2, all of those things. And he was a professor at BYU. And we're going. And then on his side, all of a sudden the lighting just starts dappling. And I'm like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? I don't want to lose it because he's just talking on such a good thread. So I'm like, we're just going to leave it. I'm just going to keep going. So we keep going and it's like right in his eyes now. So I remember what the last sentence I said. I pause it and I don't move. And I pause it and I said, is there anything you can do to do this? Sit back and it will make it better. But is there anything else you can do without moving? He said, okay, I'll sit back. Push the not pause button back. And I said, right after that sentence, I just connected the dots and he sat back. But every now and then he'd go forward and then he'd forget to set. I was like, it is what it is. It's part of the charm. There's not much more you can do, but check with your guest first. Say, is your lighting good? The sun's going to come in. We're going to be talking for a half hour, an hour. Is there any problem with lighting? So check with them. And then another tip is to make sure you don't look like you're always looking to the side like this, take a sticky note and put it on your screen and be able to know what's the 3-5 questions that you're going to ask. And that way, even though I have notes on the side, I always have my 3 to 5 questions on my little sticky note. You can even do a little short one so that if I get stuck in the moment, I can look and I remember, oh, that's where we're going. So I have those little 3 to 5 little sticky notes. All right, I'm going to stop share because I'm sure I have fire hosed you plenty right now. And we're going to take just 1 minute for you to write down what is one thing that you felt like you understood from what I just said. What was one takeaway? Just take 1 minute to write it down. What was that takeaway? Just write down one thing out of all the things. I know there was a lot, but what is one thing that was a takeaway for you in the be prepared? And as you're writing that down, I get so excited that I'm going to go and show you all the other cool slides that there were. Look at that, be present. I personally really like this. I might look like I'm listening to you, but in my head, I'm embroidering. I actually really like that. That's what we're gonna go to next. Be present. Well, I'll go back. Before we do that, any questions or anybody want to do a quick share of one of the things that they took away? What was a takeaway for you? Anyone have one they want to share? You're gonna have to unmute. Go
I
ahead.
like having the sticky note because just to have those quick reminders. Because when I've done one before, I've had like a Google Doc up, then I have to like pull that up and then that's there. And anyway, so I think just having the sticky notes, brilliant.
Love that. Thank you. And that has saved my bacon so many times. Anyone else have a takeaway that they loved or that was helpful?
I can go. I haven't done a podcast myself, but I've been on plenty. And I think that getting to know the guest was a big one. And I reverse that. And I really try to get to know who it is that's interviewing me. Like, what is their podcast about? Who are they? Sometimes I've had interviewers be really good and send questions ahead of time of like, this is what I'm wanting to talk about. And I have others that have not at all. So I'll even ask them, like, what are some things you're wanting to talk about? What are some things you're wanting to know and questions? And that's always been super, super helpful for me because otherwise we go into it blindly and I have like no connection. I don't know where they're wanting to go with it. So I think I have to take the initiative as the guest as well to get to know them and what their podcast is about and who their audience is.
Love that. And it's so true. And you can feel it in an interview. You can feel when it's not connecting. You can feel when that it just feels like they're just asking questions. Or one of my favorites as an interviewer is when you're asking a question. Oh my gosh. And that will take us right into be present. When somebody shares, you've asked a question and that guest shares this most tender, life-shifting experience. And then the interviewer goes, so when you were 10, did you find that you had, I was like, oh, no bridge whatsoever. So yeah, that will take us right into be present. Like I was just saying, I might look like I'm listening to you, but in my head, I'm embroidering. And then I'm going to take this off the stop share. So be present. What does that look like? When you are asking a question, act like you care about the answer because you should. There should be this feeling about this person that you're making this connection and everybody else feels the connection too and wants to be a part of this experience that you're creating in this podcast. That's the most important thing. So how do you make that happen? How do you have that feel come right through the airwaves? Well, be present. First thing is make your guest comfortable. At the very beginning, welcome them in. Say, I'm so happy to have you on here today. Maybe in their bio. I usually start with the bio and I get sent the official one, but I go through and I mark out things that I don't think are necessary, but things I want to emphasize. And that also helps me make my questions. I'll look at the bio, look at their experiences, and that's what I use to make the 3 to 5 questions that I'm going to ask. But I also add in anything personal. So I can do an official bio introduction, but then I can also make it personalized. And it's so fun when you can add in a little fun thing or so-and-so. And I know his wife and she makes a great coffee cake or whatever, right? Something personal, just still adds that little touch. But here's the trick. At the beginning of your podcast, before you interview them, don't talk long, because what will happen? You'll lose the energy. They'll start telling stories that they should have told in the podcast, and then they've already told it. So it's like, oh, I've already done it. So only talk for about a 1 minute. Maybe have a prayer together if it's appropriate, but have just that 1 minute get together. I'm so excited. Check their name, how you say their name. Check some details on the bio. If you're not sure, do you still have 7 kids, or do you have any more than that right now? Or how many books did you write? Because it says here, is that the same number as now? Because you don't want in the middle of the interview for them to go, oh, no, I have 19 books now, right? That's not helpful. So any of those things, make them comfortable, ask the details, and get that in that first minute and let them know the tone of the podcast. I always set up the podcast and say, I don't know how much you connect with my producer on this, but it's very kitchen table wisdom with the side of humor. We're going to very story driven. We're going to talk about your journey and then how the gospel helped you in that journey. And then any stories that come to mind, we'd love to have you share them. Now they know clearly what is the tone that we're going to have in this. And that helps them kind of set up the expectation. I also tell them how long. We have about 30 minutes together so that they know they can't be long-winded. So give them that indication. That really helps set up and make them comfortable. Next thing on being present is listen. Listen to what's being said. And that's what I was saying. Don't just quick go to the next question. It's so annoying. Listen to the answers. Listen to how you can build on that. Listen to how you can bridge and thread. Listen for the theme. It's a very active thing as an interviewer if you're going to do it right, and really connect as you go so that it builds and it invites. And as you go along, you want to keep inviting that audience. You know, I'm sure our audience listening, I'm sure our listeners are thinking, I'm wondering if our listeners have more questions about this. Let's dive into this a little more. Even though you're probably going to pre-tape it, you want to invite that listener into the loop so that they stay engaged. Another thing on listening is remember the driver and the red thread that you're using. So when you hear things, draw it back to, oh my gosh, that just tells me what a journey that you have had on this. Make sure that it kind of flows and connects, and then watch for the production value. So Sweet Jane Clayson, when Johnson, when I was interviewing her, the whole theme, it was on my personal podcast, and the whole theme on it was eliminating perfectionism. And she was talking about how that was a real thing for her. She would get, the night before she would go on air, you know, they're up at 4 a.m. She said she would get equal to what she would prepare for a final exam every night. And she had to go through all of that. Talk about perfectionism kicking in, right? And you're on national TV. No wonder she struggled with that. So anyway, we're going along, and she said there was this, she goes, oh, there's a Facebook group for overcoming, like with dealing with depression, anxiety, perfection, and things like that. And she went, I can't think of the name of that group right now. You'll probably have to edit that out. And I said, Anna. I said, Jane, we won't, because this episode is on eliminating perfectionism. We're being a B-pluser. And she just laughed. So it was perfect. It was that sort of production value feel, but of using it in the moment, listening, and not being like, oh my gosh, yes, we'll edit that out. Using it in the moment. Another experience I had was when I was interviewing Molly Bonner. And if you know anything about him, he did the movie I Am Green Flake, and it was talking about, sorry, it's going to tear me up all over again, how the pioneers came across with enslaved individuals. And this is exactly what happened in the interview. He's talking about this, and I had no idea. I did not know, even with my research and everything, I did not know that particular truth. And I did exactly that. And I was like, I know it's so unprofessional, but I couldn't help it. And I just said, I'm so sorry, Molly. I'm so sorry on behalf of the people who experienced that. And he just said, thank you. Thank you for that. And yes, it was unprofessional to tear up, but being a contributor on Studio 5, I'm here to tell you that that actually changed the way they did Studio 5. Is that Brooke and I would end up getting teary with each other, not all the time, but she said, you know what, I think it kind of broke open because we said we want to be more authentic. That was reasonable. That made sense to have that reaction. I wasn't just blubbering for any reason or whatever. It made sense for that to happen, and it would have been wrong for me to not be genuine in that experience. Now, I didn't go on about it, but That's what I'm talking about. Listening with your heart and being connected to that guest. You absolutely have to have that. Otherwise, it's just an interview. It's not an experience. And that's what we want. Also, watching for those moments. I remember interviewing Adasa, who does, what's the character on Encanto? I can't remember who she is. It's not Gabriela. It's not the strong one. Who's the other one? Dolores.
Isabella, Luisa, Dolores, which one are you talking about here? You know, I know Encanto.
She is the movie line queen. It was Dolores. And we're interviewing her. We're talking about balancing being a mom and doing this. And it's hysterical. In comes in her daughter, her little daughter, and she's on the couch and she's like doing this, and then comes up to her mom. And most people, producers would say, I need you to like, we're going to cut that and just start once the daughter is kind of removed, then you could start. And I was like, oh no, production value right there. We're talking about being a mom and she wasn't doing anything disturbing at all, right? She wasn't causing a disturbance. I just let it roll. And I told her, I said, we are not cutting that at all, Adasa. This is how we roll as mom ants. It was so good, so good. So watch for that. And then at the end of the interview with your guest of being present, wrap it up. Pause and stop the recording, and then just tell them how much you enjoyed that, your favorite moments. We actually do a highlight moment now. We do a reel on Call to Create on Instagram where I will share my favorite moment with that person, whether it was before or after or in the interview, and I'll share my favorite moment because it's so fun. But I talked for a half an hour with Steve Young after our interview. It was the huge, beautiful, deep gospel discussion. It was amazing. So anyway, wrap up and enjoy that, but don't put any of that on air. Once you've stopped the recording, it's not okay to do that. Even if you get a gem, that's where I get so many gems and I'm like, can't do it. That's just for me, like Mary said, to keep it in her heart. So unless you say, oh my gosh, that is an amazing story. Do you mind if we record that right now? I've done that one time and they did. They went back on and we re-recorded because it was so good. So just a couple of things for being present. Make your guests comfortable and get yourself set with them, and then listen and then watch for the moments and the production value and being genuine and authentic, and then wrap them up. All right, I'm going to give you a minute to write down what was a takeaway from that section on being present. While you're writing, I want to share this comment. One time, Kelly Clarkson cried through a song on stage and it was so powerful. She could hardly get through it, but it was unforgettable. Exactly. And it's not for shock effect. It's not for production value that you're doing it for. That's not, that people can see through that. And you wouldn't want to ever be like that. Then you lose that credibility as well, besides your integrity. But when it's there, when it's in the moment, that's the kind of thing that you want to go with. I remember I was recording, we were taping a series for Bonneville Productions. It was a 13 episode series. And I was with two other anchors and we were doing different pieces. And one of them was 9/11. And we were talking about that experience as it relates to family. It was all about stand up for the family. And when they put those 9/11 pictures on, ladies, I just couldn't, I just couldn't, I was keeping it together and the tears were right here. And I was just like, I looked at my anchor next to me and he was like, got it. Like he knew he just had to carry it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it took my breath away. So anyway, but I was able to keep it together. You just don't want to, be too overt about it. All right. Anybody want to share something that was a takeaway for them? On being present. Authenticity is dynamic. Yes. Sandy.
I really liked how you reminded us to invite our audience so that they feel like they're connecting. And I really like that.
It's so important. Otherwise, they're driving along and then they can just go like this with the fingertip, right? And there's so many more juicy things you want them to get. Anyone else?
Connie, I really liked, I wrote it down, go for the experience, be in there versus just an interview. So basically really listening to what they are saying and not to the next thing, basically what you're talking about, but just have that be an experience and listen of what they are saying so that you can comment about what they're saying, not to the next question you may have.
Exactly. Love that, because that really is the interview. It's the experience. It's because you're connecting. It's 1 + 1 = 642. It's that connection that you're making together that makes this interview what you want to listen to and make that a unique experience. Ingrid.
One thing about being present, I love that you do really well in your podcast, and I've heard a lot of people not do very well on other podcasts, is that part of being present is like talking about what you said you were going to talk about. Here's a podcast about, how to manage your calendar or whatever. And then they talk for 30 minutes about some TV show, and you're like, well, I got bored before I ever heard what I came here for. But so that feels kind of like related to being present. Like, hey, this is what we're going to talk about today. And you actually start with it. Like you talk about it right away.
I love that. Jump in and get to it. As soon as I'm done with the bio, I'm like, let's just jump in. Let's get to this. People don't want to waste time. So give yourself 1 or 2 minutes for that introduction and then boom, get going. I love that you brought that up. So, so good. All right. Keep those in mind. We're going to go to the next one. And that is, we'll advance, be focused on them. So that was a beautiful segue of being focused on them. That means you're thinking all the time, what takeaways are they getting from this? What is helping them in their lives? How is this helping them in their lives? How will this story be able to help them? Like when I do Call to Create, how will this help these creators be able to stay in the game or stay confident or lose the imposter syndrome? I'm thinking about that all the time. How are they feeling about what's being said? If he didn't articulate very well, say, you know what, I don't know if the listeners heard that. Can you say that one more time? Even though the listeners are not even on, even though we're taping. Think about what that guest can now share with the other people, right? What is it that they will share? And how can you focus on this guest on how you can absolutely showcase their journey, their talents, their skills, their experience and expertise that they are coming to this interview with. And that's what the people want to know. When I'm asking someone who's super famous and I'm like, well, what's a day in the life like, right? They want to know, what's the background of this? What does this look like? What does this feel like? That's what you want to keep in mind, so you're focused on them, the person, and them, how you're showcasing them to the audience, right? Being able to say, I want to make sure that you get to know this person as much as I'm getting to know them. When I interviewed Jason Hewlett, he's a global speaker and he is fantastic. If anybody knows Jason Hewlett, and I know he is all about his wife. In fact, what got him started was a viral video that said, I cheated on my wife at Target. And he's standing in the Target line and he sees this woman with long blonde hair and kind of, just from the back and kind of the side. And he's like, that husband did well for himself. And then she turns and he sees it's his wife, right? And he wasn't ogling her. He was just like, wow, really respecting and admiring, saying that is a confident woman right there. And so she turns, she's talking, and he just watches her and how she's interacting with the people in line and everything. And you should go read it. It is amazing. He is mesmerized by her. He's just adoring her and is just awash with how much he loves his wife. It's the cutest thing. So when I knew I was going to interview him, I thought, I had this idea. What if I ask, because they're super tight, what if I asked her about 5 questions and then get the answers? And then what if I asked him 5 questions and let's see if the answers match, right? So I asked him these sort of personal questions between the two. And at the end, he said, no one's ever done that before. That was great. It was just so fun and a fun way to bring his wife in, who means so much to him. So again, think about your guest, be focused on the guest, and then be focused on how you can share them with your audience in a way that they feel connected to them and feel of their love and their expertise. All right. I'm going to keep that a little short so we can scoot to this other half of you being an interviewee. But first, what's something that you can do or think in your mind that you can do to focus on your guest and sharing them with your audience, and then also focusing on your audience to make sure that they get the takeaways, making sure that they're getting the takeaways. Any thoughts on that? Another good thing that you can do on there is point it out. I'll be sitting there and I'll be taking notes surreptitiously. And if they do one-liners or really good phrases or things like that, then I will take notes and then I'll review that at the end. I'll say, remember what he said, get back up. Get back up. Just remember that story. That was so powerful to me. So those are good ways to sort of point out the takeaways for your audience as well. Anybody have anything that they want to share that's one thing they want to do to either focus on sharing your guest really well or making sure the audience gets the takeaways?
I think this is such an important skill because there's times when I get on to listen to the guest and then the podcast interview just focuses on themselves the whole time. Or I think this and this is what I think. And I think that's so great to just focus on the guest who's coming because that's why we're there, is to listen to their thoughts and ideas.
Bingo. And I think Hank Smith and John, by the way, do really good job on their podcast. I think it's called Follow Him, right? They hardly talk at all. They are really just let them speak and share, and they do such a good job with that. All right, let's scooch now. Take a breath. And we're going to switch hats. And instead of being the interviewer, we're going to be the interviewee. So we're going to go through these same three things, but just with a little bit different focus, a little bit different application of it. First thing is be prepared. How do you be prepared as an interviewee? You're going to be interviewed. The best example of all three tools of this, if you get a chance, and I'm seriously not just trying to lead you to the LDSPMA podcast, but Boyd Matheson, we just dropped that episode, a week ago or something. I'm not kidding. One of the best interviews in 3 years of doing this with them. It was amazing. He had done his homework. He was prepared. He was talking about our audience. He was talking about creators, using the word creators. He was story driven. He had small snippets. He did all of the things that I am teaching you here today. So if you want to go back and listen to how it's done in real time, Boyd Matheson, amazing. So let's start with the be prepared. Know your host. Know the show. If you're being invited to come onto a podcasting, Ingrid just mentioned that she is, go listen to an episode or two. I know when I was interviewing Brooke Walker, I do Studio 5 with her. I've done it for 18 years. She knows me. She didn't need to go on and know what I was doing on that. We get on and I'm making her comfy right at the first minute. And she's like, oh, she said some really lovely things. She said, oh, I listened to a couple of the episodes and I was just going to listen to one, but I kept listening and blah, blah, blah. It was so sweet. She listened. She did her homework. Now she knows me. She didn't have to, but she did. That's smart. Then you know the tone, you know what the host is like, you know what their modus operandi is, what their style is, all of those things. And that will help you be prepared and know what to expect. If you know that they're slow, you know, you can kind of interrupt them or guide them along. Or if they get off on strange roads, you can guide them back, even though that's their job. You can do that and make the interview successful. So know your host and then know your one big message, what I call your one big message. That means the one message you want to leave the audience with. I remember Oprah used to have, or she probably still does, the magazine. Yeah, she still does. But I used to read it years ago, like 15 years ago, something like that. And at the end, I would read it for the very end. Okay, also the makeup supplies. But at the very end, she would always have one thing I know, like what I know. And I remember one time she shared, when I go do speaking, and I do a lot of speaking, I always just think, what's the one thing, the one message that I want to leave them with, and make sure that I leave them with that. And I thought that was genius. And that has been a thread that's run through everything I do. And now when I teach women, I teach them how to be speakers, writers, and a media presence for him. But I talk about their one big message. We get that super clear, because once you know that one big message, then everything else will follow. Then you'll start thinking of the stories you want to share. Then you're going to start thinking of the, oh, this is a great takeaway that I could give them, or a great tool. So know your one big message. Also, make it your message, make it signature. So I was just invited to be on an interview for a singles podcast, and it was so sweet. These ladies were talking about the difficulties of being single in the Church and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and also just being single, period, but also being a single mom and all of those things. And I've been single for 6 years. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I'm a fit for this, because I'm going to talk about how good it is. I don't know if they want to hear that. They might want to be hearing all the sad, woe is me experiences. And I even said it when I was being interviewed. I knew that that was the driver. I was like, create the life you love. You have a second chance to now have this particular moment of emotional freedom from something that was very difficult. And now you can pursue it the way that the Lord wants you to pursue it, or be the person that he wants you to be, or make the most of this phase 2, whatever it is, instead of sitting around and feeling sorry for yourself. I said it in nicer terms. But anyway, I was very clear about that one big message, and I could see at first they were wonderful about it. And I think Kim could attest to that. They were so wonderful to go with it, because I don't think they weren't trying to like hammer on that, but I think they wanted to show contrast of like, how do we solve those problems? And they were so gracious that they were Yeah, I could see that. Yes, you can create the life you love. Yeah, we don't have to worry about how that could be at church or blah, blah, blah. That's a reality, but we don't have to dwell on that. And by the end, one of the hosts was so darling. She was like, you've totally motivated me. Like, I want to go out and I want to learn some new things and do some hobbies and blah, blah, blah. And it was so fun because that was my signature message. I didn't have to try to adapt it to what I thought they were going to try to emphasize on there. I was still giving my signature message, but it still dovetailed with what their audience would need, if that makes sense. And then the last thing on this is make it story driven. Once you know the 3 to 5 questions, if they don't send 3 to 5 questions, you prepare your own 3 to 5 questions so you know where you want this to go, and then have a story that goes with each one of those questions. We learn in stories. We retain better with stories. You want to be story driven, and that's especially on a podcast. You want to be story driven. So make sure that what you do, story driven, jot down some key thoughts, and then 3 stories that you could share about that. You may not get to them, but you'll have them in your mind, and most likely you'll pull them out of your back pocket and use them. And then the very last thing, again, is do your own tech check. Check the lighting, check for the dappled light, check your sound, check your mic, put a note on the door for deliveries. Don't ring the doorbell, whatever it needs to be, just make that happen. Sit your kids down with a movie, threaten them with extra chores, whatever it takes, people, to have that 30 minutes of peace and quiet. I say it in jest almost, but yes, mostly in jest. All right, let's go to our do really quickly of what would be a do from this section of being prepared as an interviewee. Talked about knowing your host, knowing your one big message, making it story driven, and then doing your own tech check. Anybody have one that they want to share? Okay, just in the interest of time, we're going to skirt, be present. Again, being present. The thing I love about this picture, she looks like she's having so much fun. That's what we want. Have fun, laugh, cry, make a joke, whatever, be yourself. People want personality on the podcast. Now, I'm not talking about being ridiculous and magnified. I'm talking about you. They want that voice. They want that personality. They want you. That's why they're on there. Another thing to do besides being your authentic, beautiful, personality-driven self is make it water cooler worthy. Think of your stories and your takeaways in sound bites, in isms. Get up and go, step up and show up. Whatever it might be that you need to move it forward. I talk about purpose changes everything. I teach women how to find their purpose and then how to I talk about feeling the rumble. If you felt the rumble to do something more for him, talk about that rumble. So people, when they're talking about it later, oh, she talked about feeling this rumble. And then she talked about purpose changes everything and finding that purpose. And then she talked about, wow, doing it for him, being a speaker or media or writing for him. Wow, that just changed my mindset. Whatever it is, make it water cooler worthy, and those snippets, those sound bites, so that people can share it later. Do the same thing with your story. Do not get lost in the weeds of, was it Pine Street or was it Oak Street? Nobody cares. Share that story and share it effectively and succinctly. And I have some tips and tools on that if you want to DM me later, because we don't have time for this here. But I have a really short story arc that I can share with you that would be really simple. Make sure that you're sharing it in a way that drives home the point that you were making. That's a really, really important thing to do. And when you do share that story, make sure that in your doing it, you're sharing it in a real and conversational way. Even in your speaking, think kitchen table, think going to lunch with someone. When someone talks like this, that is a good question, Bob. It is so painful to listen to. Or if you can tell they're reading it from their notes on the side because they were afraid they weren't going to say everything they wanted to say. As soon as someone starts reading something or it's memorized, people tune out. So make sure that it's real, it's conversational. Now, how will you know if you are? Record yourself for 5 minutes. I will guarantee it will probably be the most painful 5 minutes of your life aside from childbirth. I'm just saying, it can be really painful to watch yourself. It's still painful for me to watch myself, but watch for things like like, talking super fast, or talking really slow. You want to involve what we call vocal variants. So when you're telling the story, it's going up and down like it should when you're telling a story. If you talk about the story like this and you're just saying like this, ching, sounds like a typewriter that goes back, shing, and then you're telling the story and you're continuing on. They are snoozing at the wheel. Be kind, be safe, and have some vocal variants in your story, but record yourself for about 5 minutes, and that will teach you more than I could ever teach you, promise. All right, that's be present. I know I'm moving quickly, but make it water cooler worthy, be real and authentic, and record yourself for 5 minutes. Anybody have one that stood out to them?
Definitely the recording yourself. Oh my gosh, that is so hard to do. But when I have done that in a different context, even playing pickleball, if I want to improve my game, it makes such a difference if I record myself, even as painful as it is.
It's so worth it. It's so worth that 5 minutes. I cannot even tell you, it will save your bacon. I remember Ty Bennett, global speaker, said that the first time he recorded himself, I think he said 112 is what he came up with. It was some number like that, 112. Crazy. So be present, right? Be present with them and be present so that when you've recorded yourself, you see those things, you can actually be there and you're not worried about if you're going to say or like, and you're not focused on that. All right, last one. Again, be focused on them, and them being how you can also be gracious with the host. Use their name. Well, you know, Bob, I have found that blah, blah, blah. People love to hear their name. So use their name, or this is a great thing when it's really true. You say, that's a great question. That's one of my favorite things when someone says that to me. That's a great question. Or when they say, oh, I've never shared this before. Oh, do I love that? So help your host have a good interview, doing a couple of those things. Again, we've talked about in looping in the audience. Well, our listeners, I'm sure that they struggle with. I found that the top 3 pain points in this demographic, I'm sure our listeners have experienced these 3 things. Weave that in. Another thing to do, we've already talked about identifying those takeaways. Make sure if your host hasn't identified the takeaways, you identify the takeaways. Then you say, well, you know, as I said before, to be prepared. A thing that really builds on that is to be present. And so I found that, do you see what I mean? You weave in those takeaways so that the audience gets them, even if your host doesn't. The last thing is weave in some kind of value, a freebie thing. Do not sell on your podcast unless your host has made that clear that that's part of what the podcast is about. And even if you're doing a freebie, check it with your host first. So like I have a free purpose challenge, and when I go on a website or a podcast interview, when I go on there, I have this free purpose challenge so people can do a little 5 videos. They have a little workbook. I check it with the host and I say, it's free. There's no upsell, downsell. There's nothing attached. It's just full on free. I want people to find their purpose. Am I able to share that? And I can't even think of a time that someone said no. They want their audience to be able to have some value. So that's a value add that you can give them. If you have a book, you can give away some free books. Check with your host and say, I'd love to do a giveaway for someone. We just choose it off of the chat today. I can give a free book. I've done free books, we do retreats. I've done free $500 off a retreat, a free retreat. I've done, depending on what it is that we're doing in their audience that I'm speaking to, but a variety of things. But again, check it with your host, but weave that in and make it so it's not like, and did you know that I have a free find your purpose challenge? Purpose changes everything. If you don't know your purpose, then just go check this out. It's free. It's on my website. You can check it out and we'll put it in the show notes and you can just go do it, right? Make it so that it's woven in and it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. So being focused on them is being focused on the host and the audience. Make sure you're giving them value. You can look at your interview outline and say, how am I leaving my audience? This audience, their audience has now become a combo, my audience. How am I leaving them with increased value? How is their life going to be different from this interview? What can I give them that they can put into practice right now and get results? What can I give them that will give them that true value add from this podcast? And they should just be overwhelmed with the value that you're giving them, that it should just be over the top delivery. That's what I love to do. I think that once you do that, people can sift and they can choose what they want to do, but it makes them feel like, yeah, I made good use of my time today because I got some great stuff. All right, anybody have anything they want to share on being focused on them, keeping your audience in the loop, giving them clear takeaways, even if your host doesn't, weaving in a freebie, any of those things? Anything that stood out to you that you're like, I think I want to use that?
Connie, in that instance, when you're giving to them a freebie, do you have them enter an email to get that freebie in that instance?
I would, or you can have them put a word in the chat that they're going to choose from, or you can have them, you can say, go to my website right now, and you can just click on the whatever. It depends on how you're having them access that opt-in. You can just put the link in the chat and say, anybody can go on there and you can get the freebie right there. If that's what the host says is a good idea to do. If you're giving away a free book, then you can have them put in like a keyword. Say, okay, I want everyone to respond. What's the purpose that they feel like they're to fulfill? And then out of those, you can do a Tumblr thing that's like an app that you can put in like a certain number. Okay, there were 45 comments, and then it will just choose a number for you. And then you go, okay, number 23 comment, and then you can do the comment. You can do it in a variety of ways that work for you. I think the easiest way is just ask the host, post the link, and then everybody gets that freebie. I think that's a great thing to do. But you can ask them to work for you, right? that they're going to comment, or if you're going to give them a free book or something off a retreat or whatever, you can say, I want someone to pop on and share an experience. And then we'll choose from 3 people who volunteer to share or something like that. But if it's a bigger thing, then have them make it a win-win, make it a value exchange where they're doing something for you. All right. Any questions? I probably missed a lot. When I did voice lessons last year, recording myself practicing was painful and so helpful. Yeah, Marco Polo. Yes, it's great to practice. You can rewatch your polos and you can forward them to friends and say, okay, what did you think? Any thoughts on that? And then have chocolate standing nearby. Susie.
What was the random number generator? Like if you are doing a live and it can come out.
DM me afterwards, and I cannot remember it right now off the top of my head. You could probably Google, there's probably a bunch of them, but it's a Tumblr app. I can't remember what the name of it is, but anyway, Andrea probably knows. Yep, she'll put it in the WhatsApp. All right, ladies, thank you so much. And for those watching in LDS PMA, thank you so much. I hope you got great value out of this. I hope that there was something that helped you remember the benefits of a randomizer. Yep. The benefits of doing a podcast, they are so good. If this is something you're feeling to do, I would so encourage practice by doing IG lives, Facebook lives, and then start going on these podcasts as an interviewee, and then start that podcast. It's a great way to associate yourself as you interview these credible people for you to have that credibility too. I hope you're feeling a little motivated. Anybody feeling excited about doing a podcast interview or a podcast now? Anyone? A little bit more prepared, feeling a little more prepared, like you know what to do? I love it. Yay. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. For those that are watching in the future, please reach out to me at Connie@ConnieSokol.com, or you can go to ConnieSokol.com, and there's all kinds. You can book a call with me for a free consult. We can go over where you are, what's going on, and what you need. And I can give you any other tips and tools that you might be needing. Okay. So excited to see you move forward and sharing your message more effectively through using a podcast. Thanks for being with me.